Good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking the time today, whether you're virtual like myself or in person in Nashville. Wish I could be there personally. I love Nashville. Unfortunately, Navolo has some pretty strict COVID requirements right now for travel, as well as a number of our teammates currently were actually tested positive. So some of the folks who were going, we had to back out. So my sincerest apologies. Would have loved to be there. Love to support MD Expo and love the folks that we get to talk with on a daily basis there. So, first and foremost, who I am. My name is Kyle Holitz. Some of you might know me, maybe not. For others, here at Navolo, I lead our healthcare solution consulting and operational technology cybersecurity teams. I have a long background in CMMS. Had the opportunity to found, was the #2 employee at another CMMS company. Had the opportunity to do that, got my hands, quite dirty and in a lot of different areas as it pertains to, software development, customer support, deployment, sales, you name it. So a bit of a Swiss Army knife as it comes to sort of SaaS CMMS companies, right? Prior to that, had a background with the ServiceNow platform, which you'll likely hear about a little bit today in the presentation, which is what Navolo is built on. And many of our healthcare customers here at Navolo actually run ServiceNow in their IT departments. So, I like to keep these conversations very fluid, fun, if you will, conversational. So, I know that the virtual stuff makes it kind of hard sometimes to ask questions for those that are in the room. I haven't heard anyone yet, but if you do have questions, please, as Jamie mentioned, just grab the mic, get close to the mic. That seems like it's in the middle of the room, and then you can ask me questions live, and I can do my best to address them. Those that are virtual, as Jamie mentioned, just please use the chat queue. Other than that, we'll get rolling here. I'm going to turn off my PowerPoint because I talk like an Italian and move my hands a lot, and sometimes that can be distracting. So, for the purposes of today's conversation, what we're going to be going through is enabling the connected hospital environment, right? What this pertains to is the changing in healthcare, the changing of the guard, if you will, in that, we've always worked with the same departments. We've always, had this similar sort of a job that we've been doing, but the technology at which we use to do the work that we are required to on a daily basis as a clinical engineer, a facilities engineer, right, has changed a lot, right, based on what technology is out there and what is offered. So this is really going to be about, how to best utilize modern software as a part of your strategy when you're thinking about how do we connect our hospital with everyone who's involved with maintaining medical equipment and making sure it stays performant, right, and ultimately keeping patient care and satisfaction quite high. My colleague Dustin Smith, who is supposed to be joining me today, unfortunately, neither one of us could make the show. Dustin has some serious priorities going on right now, so he wasn't able to present with me this morning. If you were coming to listen to him, which I wouldn't blame you, I sincerely apologize. He's a very smart individual, and I'm so happy to have him as my right-hand man here at Navolo, and we're doing some pretty cool things. So what we're really going to be getting into today is how do we connect the support teams that work closest together in our hospital systems, HTM, IT, facilities, your supply chain or ERP team, if you will, right? All of these groups need to work closer in today's connected hospital world. The way that we're going to talk about that is through actual use cases, right? I'm not a sales guy. I'm more of a technologist, more of call it a database administrator, whatever you want to. So I like to stay in the product, but I have to go through some slides here, spell out the use cases, and we'll kind of switch back and forth between live demonstration and example use cases in the modern CMMS system and back to the slide deck. Then lastly, we'll touch on some benefits of what you could expect to realize. And for the individual that's in the room, or if there's more than one, can you guys all hear me okay? And then for the people that are online, if you could just like put a note in the chat. I just want to make sure everyone can both hear me and see my screen okay.
Hey Kyle, you're 5 by 5 in here.
Love it. I love it. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So what we're really going to be focusing in on today are the key teams supporting the connected hospital. What this requires and what this makes us think about is a strategy around what kind of platform do we need from a technology standpoint in order to get the data that each of these groups needs, right? especially capital planning, IT, facilities. What we watch after in HTM as it pertains to medical equipment and the data we collect is incredibly beneficial, and it's needed by other departments. The problem with that is when these groups that you see on the screen now, many times they work in their silos, right? They have their own system. So every time, capital planning or, the ERP or finance team or even IT asking about network connected equipment or security operations, right? That takes time out of our day. Clinical engineering is already one of those departments that is understaffed, overworked, asked to do more with less budget. And these types of requests many times can be pushed to more of a self-service fashion, but it takes a lot of time out of our day when we should be out there making sure our PM compliance is sitting at 100%, right? Making sure that we're making the best repair versus replace decisions, things like that, as opposed to building, extrapolating data and pulling it from the system and putting it in Excel files and passing it to these various teams. That'll be kind of a big topic today is visibility as a whole, right, across the organization. So when we're thinking about the current hospital environment, right, the four groups we're really going to be talking about today are the CMMS system as it pertains to both HTM and facilities. We'll be talking a little bit about IT in the form of security operations and security incidents. We'll be talking about ERP, right, and how we can, should focus some of our efforts and how we can make our financial information that we track in our CMMS more accessible to those groups. And then lastly, a little bit about OT cybersecurity, which is really the only quote unquote newer system, as I would call it, in this list, and we'll explain why. So far, to the folks that are in the room or anyone online, any questions about the agenda, what we're going to cover today, or just keep pressing on?
We're good.
All right. So where we're going to start is medical device cybersecurity. The reason this is challenging, and the reason that we bring this up in the connected workplace, sort of connected hospital presentation, is because this is a new concept to HTM, right? We've always had, or for a while we've had network connected equipment. However, that percentage of equipment that we have that's network connected is rising dramatically, which makes us think differently about both our data governance. It makes us think differently about how we work with IT. It makes us think differently about how we get information into the system, right? So what this slide is really depicting is IT's always had network monitoring systems, right? They've always had these systems. Securing IT devices, or configuration items as they call them, CIs, has always been something that's been done, right? They do it well, done it for years, but it's a lot easier, to be frank, right? They don't have the sort of diverse set of make models that they're working with on the network, and a lot of things can be sort of remotely managed, right? Whereas in HTM, we can't really remotely manage a lot of things. A lot of our network connected equipment, if we have to push out a patch or an upgrade or something along those lines, we physically have to be hands-on, right, and go flash the equipment. So what this is depicting is IT sees a anomalous behavior, right? Some sort of security threat, something along those lines. They get a security alert. However, the problem is they generally, in this example, they don't have insight into your inventory, right? Into your connected medical equipment. So what they see is a IP, a MAC, right? And that's it, right? They know something is wrong, something is physically going on with this IP or this MAC that is obviously in your environment, but they don't know what the device is. They don't know where it's located. They don't even know who owns it, right? It could be facilities. It could be HTM. It could be a number of people, realistically. It could even be a doctor or nurse who brought their laptop or cell phone from home and put it on the hospital network, right? There's so many different things that this could be. In the meantime, IT is going to be working to figure this out. HTM is going to be relatively unaware until IT comes to them and says, okay, well, we have this issue with this IP or MAC. We have this anomalous behavior going on. There's some sort of active exploit event. Do you have this IP or MAC? And that's where the fun starts, right? I mean, it is a mad scramble generally to find that equipment, right? we are running around our hospital. We generally know what's network connected, but we, notoriously, I've seen organizations all over the scale in terms of being really good at capturing all their technical information, and others not so good, right? And a lot of people fall in the middle. It's hard to know if we have 100% of that technical information accurate all the time against our network connected equipment. So the IT is going to be working with clinical engineering. They're going to be working with facilities, letting them know this is the device. Now, good luck finding that needle in the haystack to find that equipment, right? And it's kind of a disconnected process. We're relying on phone calls, emails, right? There's not a lot of system-driven attributes that we can report against, and everybody has visibility into. So the problem with this, as you could imagine, is a lack of visibility, right? And it's just a very inefficient process. And it's also very error rich because it has a lot of human process involved. So before I get into the demo of this use case, what you see here is really our proposed solution. And this isn't a sales pitch to Navola today. It's a sales pitch to modern platforms for CMMS systems, right? The difference now is you inject a layer of contextualization, if you will. So the difference here is we're not relying on IT network monitoring systems. We have our own. We have, the Assimiles of the world, the Metagates, the Zing boxes, you name it. They're flooding the market over the last 5 years. Those are specific to us, or what we call operational technology, right? Whether it be HTM equipment, facilities equipment. So they understand what it is to basically sniff packets on the network, if you will, for operational technology. So now when that cybersecurity threat comes in, the CMMS system is ideally integrated to that IoT monitoring system that's specific to operational technology. So the difference is we know what this MAC or IP address is. We know a lot of things. We know if it's immediately applicable to us, right? Because it's this MAC or IP is tied to the medical equipment that is network connected. Additionally, what these platforms allow us to do is drive a proper workflow that's going to get us the data governance we need and the data model we need, right? A lot of systems don't have the ability to say, hey, when something is network connected or when it's located in the NICU or in a wet location, right? We want to record these additional attributes about this equipment because it has this, it's network connected. So now we need to make sure that every time we ingest a piece of equipment, it's, the IP, the MAC, the OS, all of those fields are mandatory, so that it doesn't matter where I'm ingesting the equipment from the 20 different departments we work with. We know as soon as it hits the CMMS, all the data we need to do our job in any of these landscapes is there for us to use, right? So from here, this threat is contextualized, right? We know it's applicable. It's matched to a known IP, known MAC, or in the case of a vulnerability, it's matched against maybe an OS that is in multiple pieces of medical equipment, right? So you could have a threat that is spanning multiple devices, even spanning both clinical engineering and facilities. So the difference here is when this spits out, we now know IT knows what's going on, clinical engineering or HTM knows what's going on. They immediately know what's applicable to them, but it's contextualized, right? HTM is the way I like to think of it is overlaying our data on top of this threat. So we know the location, we know the supporting engineer, we know the owning department, right? So we know right where we need to go and to at least stop the bleeding, if you will, and power the device down, pull it off the network, so we can work with the manufacturer to potentially get a patch or something to fix the issue. On the other side of this, IT needs their lens into the issue, right? IT security teams, they have certain tasks and workflows that they need to do no differently than HTM. It's just a slightly different lens on that same threat, but they have work to do as well. The huge benefit here is these groups can both work from the same platform. Both this threat can drive automation, can drive sort of remediation and assignment to both of these groups at the same time, while both groups have full visibility into what's going on. So to now step into the use case, any questions so far about the challenge and sort of the proposed solution? All right, let me check the chat queue as well. Looks like we're good. All right, so the way we're going to step through this is in the form of a medical device security event. So what I have pulled up on my screen here is an example dashboard that is doing exactly what I just explained around contextualizing data coming from one of those, operational technology IoT monitoring systems, right? The Assimilates, the Metigates, the Zing boxes of the world, all of those organizations that are becoming, almost required at a lot of the hospitals that I'm working with, or at least they're in high consideration into tools that they will be really adding to their portfolio. So to kind of give an overview of what they're used for outside of just security events in this sort of connected hospital use case is things like, vulnerabilities, like I mentioned. So if I scroll down past security events, you can start to understand what vulnerabilities have we seen in that have been applicable to us, right? We've seen 11 of them. Most have been non-applicable, right? Additionally, what manufacturers are opening us up to the most risk, right? Many times hospitals have, I mean, not many times, all of us have many models that serve the same purpose from different manufacturers, right? Think of pumps, patient monitors, all these things. There's so many different models that we have in our inventory that ultimately serve the same purpose from different manufacturers. So what we can start doing with this correlation of data coming in is reporting against it in a meaningful way. So finding out, which vendors are not doing me any favors in the cybersecurity front, right? So when we go to buy 500 new infusion pumps, we can make a better decision on which ones we're going to buy, because we know that this manufacturer is not, experiencing the vulnerabilities as others are. Scrolling down, another very common use case is, of course, discovery events, right? So when I see a new IP, new MAC address that's been profiled in that IoT monitoring system as a medical device, right? It's not a cell phone, not a laptop, something that we need to track in our inventory, in our CMMS. Maybe the department forgot to let us know they purchased this, right? But we need to ingest it ultimately because we have to maintain it. So what this can give you insight into as well, and these are site codes here at the bottom, you can start to see where are these discovery events coming from. And there's really two forms: unknown discovery events and known discovery events, right? Known discovery events can just simply push data, drive automation. Unknown does a similar thing, right? It kicks off an onboarding process or something of the sort, right? Well, we have a lot of that data already entered in the system because the IoT monitoring system was able to pull some of it from the wire. But additionally, what this does in the security front is it connects the different teams, right? So when the CISO of the hospital needs to go talk to somebody because they're not following organizational policies, we can start to see, well, what sites are most of the unknown discovery events coming from? And under that, which departments are they coming from? Maybe this department, they're notorious for buying things and not letting the clinical engineering or HTM team know. Maybe they're notorious for bringing their cell phones and laptops from home and putting them on the hospital network, right? Driving a discovery event. So if I scroll back up now, what we'll get into is arguably the most important, which is the active exploits or security events, right? So in the form of the use case, I'm just going to use the second one here, and we'll talk about what's happening here, right? So what you're seeing on my screen now is basically a digitized security event. It's coming in from a CVE. This example came from Scenario, which is one of those IoT monitoring systems, right? A lot of the modern platforms will integrate with many of them. A lot of them have the same data models. So once you kind of have an integration for one, you can, do a lot with most of them. You also have a queue record, right? So everything that comes into this system isn't going to be applicable. So tracking the remediation from cradle to grave for both your engineering and clinical engineering team, your IT security team, and for regulatory compliance is incredibly important, right? Showing the full workflow of what's taken place with the security event from the moment it hit my system to the moment we closed out the work orders to get it fixed or patched or updated the device. Scrolling down, you get a sort of snippet of information around what's happening, as well as a link back to the site, MITRE in this case, that you can look this up at. See when it was detected and it was updated, but arguably one of the most important parts is the fact that we know what's affected immediately. So in that slide, we talked a little bit about finding a needle in a haystack, right? We don't have to do that here in this example. These two devices have been matched against the vulnerability based on some attribute, right? The OS, the IP, the MAC, the software revision number, for example, that there's a vulnerability against. There's a lot of different ways we can match this equipment with a high confidence, right? So we know immediately if it's applicable. One of the important things to call out in this is that staffing is changing, right? Many of the hospitals I work with are hiring or have an individual on staff who's kind of that hybrid HTM cybersecurity IT person, understands a little bit about clinical engineering, a little bit about cybersecurity and IT, right? And they really act as the quarterback, if you will, to send out work orders for techs to go and pull the device off the floor, right? Power it down. Let's just stop the bleeding for this, while I work with the manufacturer, for example, to come up with a certified patch or a certified fix for this issue, right? Because we don't want to knock the device out of compliance. So we can see both assets that have been contextualized, again, improving that visibility. So we know immediately where these devices are, who owns them. If we have some sort of automated assignments taking place, we create these work orders against this equipment, and they're automatically dispatched to a particular individual, right? We can then monitor this. So I can monitor this as that hybrid tech. If I come over here to the right, security, IT security, they have insight into see what's going on as well, right? So if there's some sort of order of operations that need to take place, someone needs to, maybe IT needs to do something before we do, we have full visibility into each other's work. Vulnerability records were also created. So again, for the risk and compliance team and folks like that, we have vulnerability records automatically created. And again, showing that full life cycle of the remediation, knowing that at a point in time, this particular asset had this particular vulnerability against it. Here's how we took care of it. Vulnerability record is also tracked in the system, again, just for additional data reporting, right? Things like that. We can see, what was included in the vulnerability, things like that. And then lastly, to really hit home the connected hospital conversation, is a security incident was automatically created from this event as well. So the security incident, many of the modern platforms that CMMS systems are built off of can be shared with IT, and they can do their work from these as well. So this is where we get into that lens, right? They have a certain workflow of analysis, contain, eradicate, recover, review, right? That they're driving on their end no differently than we're driving in HTM, right? Obviously, there's different tasks, different data needs to be recorded, but it's a similar conversation, right? So they have their lens into this security threat. Again, they know what the configuration item is, right? They know it as a CI, we know it as a pump or a certain model of equipment. But the difference is it's no longer just an IP or a MAC address to them, right? It's a very specific device from a very specific manufacturer, a very specific location that our HTM team knows, right? So they can come in here, record all the information that they need, so on and so forth. And you can see the parent, right? The records are linked here for that sort of tracking and reverse traceability. Any questions around the first use case of cybersecurity and sort of connecting the various departments that are needed in that sort of remediation? And I will check the chat queue. No? Okay, continue on here. So the next use case we're going to go into is a device's corrective maintenance, and more specifically, a network connected device, right? So something that is sitting on the network, but isn't just a standalone device, right? It's a system, something like an MRI, a CT, right? It's not a standalone piece of equipment. It's actually, multiple different devices and a system of equipment, that we're tracking. We're as an HTM group responsible for making sure it stays operational, right? As it's a major revenue producing asset within the organization. What adds complexity to this use case is that many organizations, are splitting the ownership of this equipment. So facilities, for example, owns the chillers, or they have an HVAC system that's making sure the room is temperature controlled, right? That the MRI exists in. IT might own the network connection or the server that the MRI system is really communicating with, because we have an offsite tech. They have an offsite rad tech or someone who's digesting surveys from the equipment and passing notes back to doctors. That's all happening through IT equipment, right? So we can start to understand, why this is so important for these groups to have visibility. Traditionally, again, the problem with this is clinical engineering is tasked with keeping the device operational, but if clinical engineering just gets a work order on the device and they go and check on it and they can't figure out anything that's wrong with it, the device is just had a network failure, there's a network error, right? Or the chillers are out of whack in terms of the temperature threshold that they're running in, right? That's not our issue, but we need visibility into it because we need to make sure that the MRI stays operational. So it is our issue, right? So what this is really showing is this alert, this issue is submitted, right? It's pushed in through a web portal, that somebody calls it in, however it gets in the system. There might be multiple service requests because you have multiple people that are using the equipment. Again, we don't know what the problem is from a clinical engineering perspective. We need insight from our facilities counterparts or our IT counterparts. And then what happens with that is, again, they don't have visibility into that request generally and when it came in. So there's a time to value here, right, in keeping the device operational and making sure that these requests are routed as fast as possible, as opposed to me calling up IT from a neighboring department or sending them an email and letting them know, or maybe even dual entry, creating a ticket in their system as well, which a lot of organizations will do too. So the solution here that we propose in really this example is again, and you'll start to see there's very similar themes throughout this presentation, visibility and automation being arguably the biggest, right? So when this event comes in now, clinical engineering knows, that this might not be anything that they can fix, but what they need to be able to do is quickly send a work order or a task to facilities, or quickly send a work order or a task to IT. But not only send a task, right? Report on it, have visibility into it, right? As they are doing their job from an IT and facilities perspective, we want to have visibility in HTM because we need to report back to the department when the device is up and running again, right? So we want to have visibility to close our work order out once those groups are done. Any questions about this use case before we switch over to the demonstration of it? All right. So from here, what we're going to show is we're going to go through really the full sort of example of what's taking place here, and I'll submit a request, or I'll see if we have one in the system already that we can use. But what you're viewing on my screen now is a web portal. So this web portal here that I'm showing really, it's in itself is a connected sort of hospital example, because a lot of the organizations that I work with have multiple web portals, whether it be HTM might even have a couple depending on what site you're in, or if you're reporting something against imaging equipment versus general biomed or something of the sort. IT might have a portal, facilities might have a portal on top of a 7-number call tree, right? That's thumbtacked into the nurse station wall, right? So there's a lot of different ways that requests are coming into HTM. One of the huge benefits of a modern CMMS platform is the ability to consolidate that web portal into one funnel, right? One number to call, one web portal to go to, regardless of your issue. For the end users, for the clinicians, right? This massively improves visibility and their ability to route things to you, right? Because they don't care about what portal they're submitting something into generally. They just know that they have a problem, something's broken, and we need to fix it, right? So when we look at this portal, this is an example of really that consolidated portal. So if I was to, request something, for example, I can go into this and I can browse different catalogs, whether it be clinical engineering or facilities. In this case, I'll just use clinical engineering. And then I can come in and report a device issue. So what we would do from here, and let me type in an asset tag, make sure I get the right one. 6455. Keep my MRI example alive. So right off the bat, and these portals are very, very flexible in terms of the data that's shown on the screen. Many times we can't get a tag, so we can get a location, right? And then the technician can update that when we get there. But what this is nice is again, visibility. Let the clinicians know, give them a little bit of visibility into what's actually taking place with this equipment right now, right? Maybe there's a PM on the device, a CM on the device already. If these individuals, if this guy, Kyle Holitz, was able to provide a little more detail into his last request, I might now know if I'm gonna submit a duplicate or not, right? So giving those clinicians a little bit of visibility both against the asset, and if I don't have an asset request, what's taking place at the location or the room that this device is in. Maybe somebody already submitted a work order against the device, but they couldn't find the asset tag, so they did it against the location, right? So this connected hospital example is really spanning beyond just HTM and facilities and IT. It's also involving your clinicians and your end users, as we like to call them. So in this case, I'm not going to submit a work order because I can see that there's already 3 against this particular device. So what I can do then is, well, I want to check and see, what's taking place. Has any work been done? Right? In this case, I submitted this request, so I have the ability to just scroll down and in real time check the request that I made against the equipment. Of course, I checked the wrong one. Here it is. So the reason I wanted to pull this up is because many times, some of the largest successes that we see, me at Navolo is through this service portal, right? A lot of the largest benefits that we see from our clients in terms of connecting clinicians to the HTM or facilities department is from the standing up of a consolidated portal, increasing the visibility of issues, but not only the visibility, but the communication track. So in this case, right, I just submitted a work order saying broken, right? So Dustin can come back, from the work order and communicate back and forth with me in sort of a chat-like experience. It's also about, making sure that these people are happy. They know what's going on. They know when this equipment is going to be back up and running, ultimately, so we're not having to divert patients and keeping patient satisfaction a little bit higher potentially. So Dustin can come back and say, well, what's broken? You didn't provide me much detail. Screen is non-responsive. Okay, awesome. Looks like Dustin's going to need to get IT involved. So right away, this engineer has the ability to tell this clinician a little bit more about what's happening and what he's going to be doing on the back end. And this clinician can also see a snippet of information over here about the problem they submitted as it's moving from a draft state to a work in progress, right? So on and so forth. So on the engineer side of things, now we have to fix the work order, right? So whether I'm grabbing that from a technician dashboard, maybe it's automated, in terms of its assignment to me, right? A lot of different ways that work order can get into the hands of the engineer, whether it be from a queue, right? Maybe I'm the imaging tech at the hospital and I take care of a first pass at all the imaging work orders, right? Things like that. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to scroll down to all my work orders so I can hit that work order from the queue. And if I just sort by updated, looks like it's right here. So what we're going to be talking about now, now that we're on this work order, once it opens up for me, is the connection of those various departments and also the visibility into the work that's been done. So a couple things I'll point out. Right off the bat, we see that this device is under contract, right? So arguably, dependent on the issue that the clinical engineer, is working with, and this one was assigned to Dustin, right? If this is a contract covered issue, we have an MSA against our, big iron equipment, for example. Maybe, if it's an issue with a part or something of the sort, I can have a vendor come in and fix this for us because we're paying good money for them to do that. But I need to take a first pass generally, right? Because it might not be the device that's malfunctioning. So the first thing I could look at, and this example is really drives home the connected hospital sort of talk track, is what is this equipment dependent on, or what are its dependencies off of it? So in this case, we can see that, well, we know the server. We know that there's a facilities chiller or HVAC system that facilities has identified as equipment that's associated to my MRI system. So right off the bat, we're not going off of assumptions, right? What this does for us is it allows us, as we're looking at this device and figuring out the path of remediation that we're going to take as an imaging engineer, I can tell IT, right, and go in and have read-only rights to this form because we're using the same platform. I can tell them exactly what server is connected to my MRI. So I'm no longer relying on them and taking the time out of their, again, this is a lot about saving time, taking time from them just saying, hey, I think that there's a server issue with my MRI system 236455, right? I can tell them that I assume that it's likely this server, right? I can see that there's a dependency in the system between the two, or same concept on the facility side, right? We're not tasking facilities to go find what that equipment is, I can view that record, right? I can come in and tell them, this is the exact device that we think is causing this issue. We're going to need your help in remediating this, right? And again, we're going to need visibility into what's taking place with this equipment. Maybe we're getting an overheating error or something of the sort. As I scroll down, we'll see that communication thread that took place here. All right, so I can see, you know, Dustin actually physically asked me when I submitted the work order, well, what's broken? Told him the screen, he's fixing it. So this is where that communication takes place. Again, all from that work order. So that connection between clinician and technician is all handled through the same work order that the tech is already used to working from every single day, right? So it's about familiarity there. As I scroll down, I know the contract coverage, so supply chain, financial teams are happy because I'm not wasting parts and labor at this point, right? I can see as a technician what's covered under the contract. I have additional abilities that I can see things like related work orders, right? Upcoming maintenance. So if there's a PM due on the equipment, I had to travel to go do this work, even though it's not my task, it's IT. I might as well do the PM once the device is back up and running, or just handle it now if I can, right? But most importantly, what you then see is the clinical work order tasks. So again, in the past, we handled this through emails, phone calls, maybe even dual entry into the facilities system or CMMS system or the ITSM system that they're using to track incidents and things like that. Oops. I guess notifications slip through do not disturb. But really important here is that clinical engineering can come in. We can create these tasks. We can tell IT, right? If they're using the same platform as us, we can track this. So as IT comes in and they move this into a state of close complete, right? Right from my work order as an HTM group, I see what's taking place. I have full visibility into the workflow and process, and when my IT department has assigned this out and ultimately finished the work. Same with facilities. So I can see when facilities is going to come in, who they've assigned, if I need to contact anyone, and ultimately when they come in, they record their labor and move this task to close complete. No differently than I have a queue in HTM that I field work orders from, so do these groups, right? So these tasks, being that they're being sent to these assignment groups and we're all extending that same base task table in the system here in the CMMS, they have visibility when I create these tasks, and it's going to feed their queue, right? So they can dispatch it the proper way. They likely have a dispatching process no differently than we do, right? People that support medical equipment, people that support network connected equipment, or a site or a department, so on and so forth. So again, what this comes down to is visibility from the clinician to the HTM group to our neighboring departments and facilities or IT. We have improved visibility. Each of these work orders comes with, you know, the ability to report against them. There's service level agreements that are likely in place, so we can track our performance against SLAs if need be, and so can these other groups. How are we supporting one another, right? That's really what this comes down to. Any questions around this use case before we move on to the next one? Let me check the chat. Looks like we're good. All right, so the last use case doesn't really have a problem and solution statement like the others, and really because it's really just a concept that a lot of our customers are driving home with things like ERP integrations or setting up, you know, data exports to Oracle BI tools or Tableau or Crystal, right? You name it. There's all sorts of them out there. But the use case revolves around capital equipment replacement, right? The HTM and clinical engineering team arguably holds some of the most critical data to the financial groups within the hospital that they need to do their job, right? We hold the labor, the parts, the total cost of ownership, cost service ratio. How much money did we spend last quarter? How much can we budget for, you know, next year on parts replacements that we're going to need for both our PM load as well as our, you know, sort of average parts replacements for corrective maintenance. We hold that information. Other groups in the organization, they need that information to do their job, right? So instead of constantly burdening the HTM team and making, you know, having us pull reports or pull data, put it in Excel, start building these reports for them. And that takes a lot of our time, realistically. It takes a lot of time. And it's very, very common is the other thing I would say. The reports that are generally being asked for from these groups aren't changing often, right? Now, IT might have some different ones, based on current security threats and things like that, run reports against certain OSs or, certain software firmware levels, things like that. But the financial stuff is relatively similar, right? So the goal with the connected hospital is letting them self-serve themselves in a sense, right? We can set up a data model, we can set up exports with this use case in this really a modern platform with all the information that these groups need, and we can push it to them in either an automated fashion, or we can just again use the web portal that we talked to let them self-serve themselves, give them access to reports in a read-only conversation, right? Whether they be sort of list views that can be exported to Excel for them, or of course, graphical or dynamic reports in the form of, bar charts and things like that. So what I'm going to go into now is this last use case. So this one, again, will start out in the portal. So the first concept here that we like to show is what I call end user dashboards, right? That financial team, right, whether they're in supply chain or the ERP team, right, or a site financial lead or a capital planner, whoever it might be, they're considered end users to us, right, in HTM. They're using data. They need to just submit information to us every now and then, or mostly just view data that we have and that we've, pushed specifically to them. So in this system, that's available. Anything that I do on what I'll call the database side of things, I can front end a specific experience for in my web portal. Meaning it doesn't matter if it's a capital equipment request, right? Or, for the facility side of things, a remodel request. I want to make a capital purchase or suggest that we make a capital purchase or spin off a purchase requisition, right? That's something we track in the database side. That's a record we have. Why not extend it to the end users so we can funnel those requests in? In the financial aspect, what I'm going to go into here is view departmental key reports. So the goal with this, and some of these aren't applicable to the financial conversation, but one is here, which is why I pull up the example, is, generally what I've found with the customers we work with is 80% or so of the requests for data or reports are the same coming from this group, right? So what we can do is if we can self-serve them 80% of their needs, just being a sort of floating goal, right? That's a massive benefit to us. That is a lot of time that we have returned back to our day with a little bit of sort of strategy and thought, and also, conversations with the group into what are those reports that we can push out to you so we don't have to produce this every month, every week, every quarter for you. So in this system, everything's a real-time report, or near real time, and nothing's really real time, but very close to being real time. And they can see things like what work orders are open, what's in progress. So sort of basic information, right? Of how much work have I caused you if I'm the head of surgery or if I'm a site financial lead at one of the facilities, one of our major hospital facilities. But also seeing something like, PMs, missing in use, especially right now in COVID times, right? I always joke, being a part of the COVID class in this industry, we're going to be recording a lot of devices in use, right? And whether we're getting waivers from Joint Commission or DNV around this, or we're flagging these as certain, COVID related work so we couldn't get to it, or whatever it might be, it needs additional sterilization. There's a lot of different things we're doing here, but why not make this a team sport, right? We're constantly helping these other organizations, these other departments in the hospital with their needs, right? They can help us too. So, and then when it comes to unable to locate or, in use PMs that we've recorded, why not push that information back to the clinicians, back to the department heads, right? So they can let us know, hey, if this asset pops up, please let us know. We recorded this as an unable to locate or an in use when we made our last PM tour. If it's not being used anymore, please let us know. We can get that back up and running, keep our compliance high. For the financial conversation, department end of service dates. And this is just one example by looking at, devices that are being end of serviced and are also in a poor condition is what this is showing, right? So what it's really showing is, and this could be any identifiable date, right? It could be end of life, end of service, it could be these devices have approached, 100% cost of service ratio, meaning we've spent about as much maintaining them as we did buying them, which is generally a good indication of, when we should think about replacing it. Organizations do that very, very differently across the country, but that's just a sort of basic example. But what it allows us to do is if I'm a site lead, if I'm a financial lead or an ERP, I can just simply check my dashboard. And this is just one example, right? I've seen customers create multiple dashboards, sort of functional dashboards, if you will, for different purposes. But they can come right in here, see, based on our infusion pump modality of equipment, how much do we have in a worn or needs to be replaced condition? How much money is sitting out there? And what do we want to sum? So you can see here for our infusion pump modality, we have about $230,000 in equipment that it needs to be replaced, right? And whatever characteristic you're putting it in. So that's great, and based on the last time we paid for them, right? So in terms of a budgetary number for, the people that own this equipment, right? And I can change this to model name, manufacturer, different things like that. For the people that own this equipment or departments that are buying it, this is great information if they're trying to put out budgetary numbers. If we want to try and replace these things next year, based on the last time we paid for these things, how much did it cost? And again, if we wanted to drill down into this, that individual can, of course, get read-only rights, right? And come in and see exactly what that equipment is, see which one performs the worst, what the total cost of ownership is. And right from here, if they want to use this for their analysis, right, come in and export an Excel file of that specific equipment, for example. Some of the other use cases that we like to talk about in the ERP conversation are best served through dashboards. So one of the things that I'll look at is quickly the cap planning dashboard as well as the financial. So anything that you see on this screen, right, can be drilled down into, it can be exported out to those other groups, or like I just showed, could be created in terms of a sort of end user dashboard, a self-serve example, right? So the report right off the top is just showing based on department, right, what device do we have, what is performing the worst, right? So in this case, I can see that we have 5 devices sitting at 100% cost of service ratio. This one's at 23%, right? And I can see things like, well, what's the total cost of ownership of that equipment? What's the acquisition cost? That's useful information if we're tracking things like depreciation in the system, generally in ERP, but there's no reason we can't create a calculated field so we have that information as well. As I scroll down, looking at things like condition assessments. So if I'm looking across my make model inventory, how many plum A's do I have sitting in a worn condition that need to be replaced? And again, I can extrapolate this data by different things, by department, by site, you name it. If I want to drill down into it, I can see something like, well, the logistics department owns all 66 of these devices. I can see their acquisition cost, their labor, their service contract. All that information is here for me, and if I scroll to the bottom, I can get nice summations of it all. And then lastly, for the repair versus replace conversation on this dashboard, understanding how much money do we have in devices from various manufacturers that are kind of in that quote unquote replaceable time or condition, right? If it's exceeding 100% cost of service ratio, we need to start thinking about, how we're not only how are we maintaining this equipment, but is it time to replace it as opposed to just continually repairing it? And then if we scroll down, we can see exactly where those costs are coming from. The last thing I'll point out is the financial overview. Very similarly, right, I just like to show different examples of reports, tracking contract ROI. So how are we performing against our contracts? It's always something that supply chain, that the ERP system, that we're gonna need in terms of getting that data over to them. So how we're performing against them is very, very important. You can see there's different ROI examples. And if I scroll down, tracking your most expensive models by modality or by asset type, right? So if we're asked from our supply chain team or from one of those financial groups to give a recommendation on infusion pumps because we're going to buy 500 new ones next year, how do I do that with the most confidence, right? Looking at your most expensive models by modality, assuming we have a like volume of this equipment, is one really good way to do that. Again, pushing that information to them and how you got your answers is very important. A lot of this comes down to workflow, right? What data are we entering every single time we do a work order, every single time we ingest a piece of equipment into the CMMS from various departments? And then lastly, looking at owning department projected end of life, right? So in 2021, we can let the pharmacy team know you have, based on end of life replacements, about almost $1 million worth of replacements there. If I want to look at this by site or asset type, I absolutely can, right? So in the pharmacy example, it looks like there's a bunch of pill counters that need to be replaced. In 2022, we have some X-ray generators that need to be replaced, right? So all this information, again, is capable of drilling down. You can see what exactly is taking place. But then also in the case of tools that those groups are using, like Oracle BI or Tableau, we can easily set up, things like XML exports, export sets, to physically send queried information to those systems on an automated basis. Again, so those systems that those other financial groups that are involved in capital planning exercises, right, have all the data that they need to make their lives easier, and you're not being burdened with the time that it takes to supply that information to them, when we won't need to just make sure that the medical equipment is going to stay in a performance state. Any questions about the last use case here before I wrap up?
Yeah, there's a question coming. Hold on just a sec.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Kyle, how do you calculate cost of service ratio? I've never seen it 100%. Is it calculated over the years of ownership? Would that be cost of service ratio, or would that be cost of ownership?
So we kind of have both. So in the system, right, and I'll just click into this asset record to talk to that. In your financial tab here of the asset record, this is a bad example because it's giving me zeros, but basically what it looks at, these are calculated fields in Nivola, right? So I would say that this is probably a very not a very mature formula for cost of service ratio or even total cost of ownership. And the reason I say that is because a lot of people do this differently, right? Depending on what organization, what region you're from, or just how you prefer to track this data, it's done differently in a lot of cases, right? In organizations, some don't want to pull acquisition cost in the conversation, others do, right? So those things can be changed, is really what I'm getting at in the system. So in this case, what we're looking at in terms of total cost of ownership, our out of the box field, again, this is just simply a calculated field where all the work orders from this equipment is being basically summed up, right? All the costs associated with those work orders is being summed up. So total cost of ownership is looking at acquisition cost plus any labor, materials, or service contract costs. Cost of service ratio is that division, right? Is really the, I believe it is all of your labor, materials, and contract costs divided against, or reverse, but divided against the acquisition cost. Simple, but again, we can configure that and change it in the system.
Usually the cost of service ratio is an annual calculation though, right? So that's why I was wondering.
Yeah, and so this, right, out of the box in the system, I've seen people use 3 years, I've seen people use 5 years, I've seen people use 1 year. I always say it's like the "what have you done for me lately" conversation, right? So I agree. I think it's like a 1 year ratio is what I see a lot and is likely most useful, right? That can absolutely be changed. Out of the box in the system, it is looking at the life of the equipment though, from basically the installation date. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, yeah.
All right, and I know I'm a little over time here, so I want to be respectful to that. Positive outcomes, right? You can imagine what these are. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but uptime is a big one of equipment, right? Coordinating efforts between these departments will increase uptime. We're not relying on air-rich human processes, right? Everything's system-driven, SLAs are reportable, and we have visibility into all of that. More reports are available in real time. Not only are they available, they're available to lots of different groups, right? We talked about, IT having visibility, facilities having visibility, capital planning or finance teams having visibility. They can all use certain reports, use the data we have in meaningful ways to help them do their job better. Targeting cost savings, right? It's really about where do we have the opportunity for improvement. If I see to the cost of service example, right, if I'm a Kaiser Permanente or someone who has hospitals all over the country in many different regions, right? If I start seeing extrapolating data from that asset level, right, I can roll that data up. Since it's living on the asset, I can roll it up to site, to region, to the owning department that owns the equipment. And that shows me opportunities of where people might be supporting and maintaining equipment better than we are in our region. So it incites collaboration, right, of why, how are you doing this? How are you keeping your COSR scores low? Well, we're, triple that. Faster remediation falls right in time with uptime, right? Improved cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a massive hot topic conversation for the last 5 years in our world. But it really comes down to people, process, and technology. When I talk to cybersecurity, there's no silver bullet. There's no one size fits all sort of solution that's going to solve all your problems. It's a team sport, and it requires people, process, and technology. You can't just ingest technology to solve all your problems, right? It starts with the people that are buying the equipment, the process of how you get it into the CMMS, right? And then from that, we can massively drive you up that maturity curve in terms of your cybersecurity strategy. And then lastly, we talked a lot about process integration. So whether it be sending data, right, getting data feeds from the IoT monitoring system, pushing thing or pulling from RTLS or accounting and the financial teams, us as the HTM team possess so much important data to the other groups in the organizations. The more that we can give them automated visibility or more accurate information only improves the both satisfaction of the people in those other groups and our decision-making abilities across the organization. And I already did that. So, so anyways, I went a little 5 minutes over time. I apologize for that, everybody. Any last questions that you might have about the presentation? If nothing else, I hope you guys found this, or guys and gals found this educational, somewhat entertaining. And other than that, I hope you all have a great day, unless there's any last questions.